Welcome to Frequency. I'm Chuck Gose.
And I'm Jenni Field. Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture, and employee experience, beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. Now, Chuck, you are not at home today, so where are you? Because you have a funky background behind you.
It is. I like sort of the funky background. I am in New York City. We've talked about this when we recorded the podcast that you and I might be recording from some different places because we don't have a job where we're at our desks all the time. And so, yeah, I'm glad it looks good because what you don't see is my laptop propped up on my suitcase with the microphone also on the suitcase. I tried the luggage rack. It did not really work that well. And normally I would just move furniture. But anybody who's been in a New York City hotel room, you don't have a lot of room to move literally anything, let alone yourself. So we are here today. We are here.
Nice. Well, I like the background. I think it's very cool. So the things that I wanted to kick off with today are the fact that I am spending 2 hours of my day in a machine to fix my shoulder, where I can't use any technology at all in those 2 hours because it's magnetic stuff that's fixing my shoulder injury. So I'm spending 2 hours every day reading reports, books, a mixture of things. And I'm just really enjoying having that time to read for 2 hours a day and reflecting on the fact that I definitely need to read stuff that is printed in order to really read it. It's definitely a reflection for me, but it's making me want to carve out more time to read documents, reports, all of those things. Like I've printed off everything we're going to talk about today. And I just wondered how much time you dedicate to reading stuff that you have to read a day or a week. Because I don't think I can sustain 2 hours a day. I think that's probably pushing it in terms of actually my ability to do stuff. But I'd like to carry something on in terms of like an hour a day of reading. How much time do you spend?
I like the idea of dedicating time because I would say I dedicate 0 hours a day to it. It's more as things pop into my view, I try to read them. I am also guilty of if I don't read it right then, and let's say it's a report and you download the PDF, man, I'm probably not coming back to that PDF unless we end up talking about it somehow or I need to go back and review it. So I'm sort of like an in the moment person. But I love this idea, though, especially with you going through this therapy, I guess, of sorts. I can't think of a better word for your shoulder, of using that time because you can't be on your phone, which is what sucks us in anyway.
Yeah. And so many people that I know locally who have had the same treatment said to me, "Oh, I just had a little nap." And I was like, yeah, I can see that. Like the other day I ran out of stuff to read, so I just had to lie there for an hour, which was, sort of I think they call that like meditation now or mindfulness. But it's been good. It's been good.
I actually would prefer, I think, just an hour with my own thoughts.
Yes. Yeah.
I actually think that would be a really lovely thing to have that without any interruption or distraction.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing. So that is, yeah, it's very nice. Very nice. Anyway, what have you got on your list for us to talk about this week?
Yes, absolutely. Let's get into this. Before we get into our first story about Duolingo and its AI first memo, I realized something, Jenny, about our last episode. We didn't talk about AI once in that episode, which I think might have been our first AI-free episode, even if it was completely unintentional. So obviously AI doesn't need to dominate every single conversation, but this week it's going to. I am tripling down on our AI conversations this week. After Duolingo, we're going to dig into a new MIT report showing that 95% of corporate AI pilots are already failing to deliver results. We'll turn to the darker side of tech with Fast Company's piece on data poisoning and how bad actors can sabotage AI by corrupting the very data that it turns on or runs on. From there, we'll zoom out to the bigger workplace picture where remote work, Jenny, is quietly proving more resilient than the executive obsession with office mandates. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, Jenny. And then we'll wrap with Shel Holtz revisiting an evergreen debate for communicators. Where should internal comms actually report inside the organization? So with all that on deck, let's start with Duolingo and how one memo turned into a lesson for AI messaging gone sideways. Duolingo set off alarms from its CEO and announced that the company would be going AI first. Those are in quotes. Employees and outsiders alike interpreted it as a declaration that this quirky green owl, which has great social content, by the way, was ready to trade in human creativity for algorithms. Within days, the company walked it back, explaining that the memo was meant to simply emphasize how AI would support employees, not replace them. Still, the phrase did hit a nerve and became a cautionary tale for how quickly a bold sounding strategy can morph into an employee relations problem. Jenny, when leaders use terms like AI first, what's the communicator's role in shaping that message so that it reinforces what they want to say and excites people instead of scaring your most important audience, which is your employees?
I think this is such an example of a buzzword phrase from a CEO and a leader without thinking about the meaning behind it. And from a communications perspective, it's such a trap because as the communicator, you're left sort of scrambling around if they just, use it as a throwaway comment around what does this really mean? What does it look like? How do we interpret that? What's the implications? Does it change how we operate? Does it, there's so many questions. And I think quite a lot of the time leaders don't recognize that or think about it. Now, in this instance, the CEO does say that internally it was fine. It didn't get misinterpreted internally in the interview that's in this article, but there is an issue around what you're inferring. Even if people are saying, oh, this is fine, we get it, you're still saying that I'm going to choose technology over a person. I mean, that is the interpretation. And I think we have to be very clear about what those words mean. So for me, the job of the communicator is asking all of those questions. Like, what does this look like? Explain to me how this would impact our hiring process. Explain to me how this would impact our training and development for our teams. Explaining how this impacts how we go from A to B. Like, what is it that AI first is going to change about how we do things? Because ultimately in the interview, he's saying it doesn't actually change anything. He's saying, we've hired the same number of people. We've always used AI. We just want to make sure that we're using it in a way that's enabling us to be more efficient. And I think they have days of the week where they can spend time sort of playing with AI as well. So I think it's just asking all of those questions and being curious as the communicator to not just assume, but to dig underneath and figure out what that means.
I think this is a great example of I think I've talked about in the past that there's a lot of things that communicators can learn from their marketing colleagues. But I think this is an example of marketing speak bleeding
Mm,
into internal comms, where you're going out to customers and saying AI first. That should mean something different than what your employees are hearing. Because if I'm an employee and I hear AI first, I'm like, well, who's second?
yeah.
What's second? And when you look at other organizations like Southwest Airlines, who have always said, no, employees first, customers second. Okay, automatically employees know this is where we fit. When you say AI first, I think it's natural for an employee to begin
Mm,
questioning, like, what does this mean? Because of a lot of the fear mongering that's out there around AI, eliminating jobs, changing jobs, all that stuff. I think it's natural for employees to react in that way.
yeah.
So
I,
I think, again, it's an example of marketing language bleeding into internal language.
yeah, I love that. And I think it's also not doing the work around what that message means to that stakeholder
Hmm.
group. Like, you have to invest that time in the planning and the preparation when you're sending things out, because employees are not like any other stakeholder you've got. They are invested, they are engaged, they care, they might be cynical, like but they are in it, right? They're not
Hmm.
consuming that product, so their reaction is going to be so much more emotional than any other stakeholder group that you've got. And if you're not giving it that time to really say what that means and what that looks like, then you're going to get that criticism, and you deserve that
Hmm.
criticism and challenge because you haven't put the work in to figure that out.
Yeah, I think I love though the example of them encouraging employees to dedicate time.
Mm,
You're dedicating 2 hours a day to read.
mm,
I like that they're talking about dedicating some sort of allotment of time to go play, to go learn, to
yeah,
go experiment. I think that's the great message
yeah.
here. It's just a shame that this AI first, because I think they're trying to get the attention, ended up actually doing the wrong type. of
Yeah.
attention.
And the only thing I would like to point out from the article that I thought was quite interesting was the fact that on the Duolingo app, it says it takes about 550 hours to get to the level where you can speak a language properly. And he said, people will tell me I have a 1,000 a day streak. Why am I not fluent? He said, if they only do one lesson a day, that's 3 minutes. A 1,000 day streak is 50 hours and it takes 550 hours, which just makes you realize how long it takes to actually learn a language. And I just thought that stat was interesting for anyone trying to learn.
Well, you really did print everything out
I did.
for
I
this
did.
episode.
Yeah.
You're really taking this like
I've,
tangible
I've leveled up, my
thing.
friend.
You've really gone above and beyond. Let's move along to MIT research. MIT researchers just dropped a reality check on the AI gold rush. It was a staggering 95% of corporate generative AI pilots are failing to deliver measurable impact. CFOs are especially frustrated. After months of investment, many pilots remain expensive experiments with zero path to scale. It's a bit of the classic hype cycle playing out in real time, and communicators are caught in the middle along with the rest of their colleagues. Leaders like to trumpet breakthroughs, and employees expect this big change to happen across the organization, but then reality falls short. I think trust then takes a hit. Oh, Jenny, do you think that communicators should be the ones pushing back on some of these inflated expectations, whether it's AI first or AI driven or AI powered that these leaders are throwing out there, even if it risks dampening perhaps some of the enthusiasm that executives have out there?
So I thought your question here was really interesting because it reminded me of a previous episode where we talked about the judginess of comms people and whether or not it's kind of our job to get involved in some of these things. And I sort of found myself sort of battling with that a little bit or coming back to that and thinking, is it the job of the communication professional to push back on expectations around AI? Because I feel like, it might be in terms of how we're messaging, how we're talking about it, what's the reality behind it. So the same questions really around the AI first, but what's the measurable impact? What's the project? What are we trying to prove? Or, all of the information that you would ask about anything that was going on inside an organization is still valid here. And I think we do dampen enthusiasm in organizations by asking these sorts of questions, because I think any project that comes across your desk is somebody full of beans and excitement, usually about something they're doing. And we're having to be the ones to say, have you thought about this? Or what about this? Or actually, that's not what I've heard over here, or that's not a reality that's playing out in this part of the business. So I think we have to maintain that regardless of what the project is. But what I would say is this tracks with what I believe when I sit in industry events and hear people talking about AI. And I just think we are not where some people would want us to be in terms of AI and organizations. And I think having this research is helpful as a bit of a reality check about kind of where we
Hmm.
are on it.
Did you say full of beans?
Yes. Is that another one? Do you
That's
not
another one. We're adding that to the list. Adding that to the list. I think when you dig a little bit deeper into this research, the data point that I think was particularly interesting to me was talking about the sort of the DIY AI projects versus the buying AI, and the success rate of the purchase, like already
Mm,
out there, was double what the kind of the do it yourself and build your own. And that sometimes it's such a unique company culture thing where somebody's like, oh no, we're better. Like we should be the ones building it instead
mm,
of buying what's been built. I thought that was interesting. But ultimately, Jenny, this is no different, I think, than we see all the data points around any sort of change projects that happen inside corporations. I don't, the number I think was before like 70% failure. So you could say that AI is failing at a greater rate. But I wonder if some of that's because of the excitement, because people are, there's so much talk about it, there's so much enthusiasm about it, that they're actually putting more energy into it than they would other change projects that are happening, because they don't want to fall behind. They don't want to be seen as that company that's missing out. But ultimately they are, because they're not getting it right. These
mm.
projects and these pilots are failing.
And just to your point on the we're going to build our own, and that isn't having the success rate. It's made me think about the journey that often IT teams go through, certainly in my experience from the intranet when that first arrived, of we're going to build our own and create our own version, and then moving to kind of off the shelf, which is eventually where most places end up.
Hmm.
Certainly in my experience, I built stuff using WordPress and BuddyPress, and then gradually you move on to stuff that's been built by somebody else. And I wonder if this is the same, if we're going through that same journey of we're going to build all our own stuff, but eventually it'll become an off-the-shelf solution. I just don't know that the off-the-shelf solutions are ready for what organizations probably want them to do. And I think that is a security thing, like we've sort of touched on, that people want to build their own. But it's an interesting parallel that I think from previous tech revolution inside
Hmm.
organizations.
Yeah, I think the build versus buy, I'm fascinated by that. And it always reminds me back to when I was a very young homeowner. And I was somewhat disillusioned by thinking I could build my own deck, like on the back of our house,
Yeah.
because people do that.
You
People
they
build their own
do.
decks.
They do.
And so I remember talking to a deck builder, and I remember asking him, he's like, you know what? You absolutely could build your own deck. But he's like, let me tell you what I learned when I built my second 100 decks compared to my first 100. And then when I did my third 100 decks, what I learned from that after the second 100 decks. And I'm like, yeah, you do this all the time. So you know things that I would never be able to learn. And I think sometimes that's what I think IT teams, especially, I don't know if there are communicators in there well, that they miss by not partnering with tech providers.
Yeah.
They don't recognize the knowledge that this might be your organization's first time. This is their 100th or
Yeah.
1,000th time of going through it. So they know things that you will have to learn. So learn from them. And I think this is that example. There are companies out there that are building themselves around how to teach AI, how to set companies up for success for AI. Like lean on those
Mm.
because there's going to be that DIY attitude from somebody. And this is showing that that's not going to work.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the decks. It just makes me realize how uncrafty I am. Like I always, I'm very aware of where my skill set is.
Well,
I,
that's when I say disillusioned, I had no business, Jenny, thinking that I could, because there again, I would have to go buy all the stuff
yeah,
to then not even the supplies, but to do like he has all that stuff. He's
yeah,
already made that
yeah,
investment. So
yeah. I'm with you on that. Get the experts in.
absolutely. This I think was I'm gonna take a different spin on our next article, Jenny. It was all about AI data poisoning, which I thought was fascinating. AI's potential doesn't just hinge on clever algorithm, it depends on the integrity of the data that trains them. Fast Company highlights the rising threat of data poisoning, which is now a phrase you're going to hear me say way too often, Jenny, where malicious actors deliberately slip flawed or false data into the mix. The result? That AI systems then can't be trusted. Some experts are betting on blockchain to help verify data sources, but there's still no easy fix. For organizations racing to integrate AI, what we just talked about, this isn't just a technical risk, it's also a trust crisis waiting to happen, one that could shake both employee confidence and customer credibility at the same time. What do you think, Jenny, on how proactive should communicators be in explaining these kinds of risks to employees versus keeping the focus on AI benefits? Where do you see data poisoning risks out there?
I think this is fascinating. And I think there are a few things to think about here about how we work today in organizations in terms of digital stuff. Because this made me think about cybersecurity and how much that is still such a huge area for organizations. And I don't think we've nailed that. I think there's still, so we've talked about, I think a few months ago, we touched on Marks and Spencer's, the chain over here that has had a massive cybersecurity incident that's meant they've not been able to do online orders for months. So that sort of gap there, I think, is still quite big. And I remember writing cybersecurity guides like 7 years ago, and that's still something that is coming up now. So I think there's a role for communicators in taking that angle in terms of that security piece. I think the other thing is the data poisoning piece is how is that system being built? So if you're building your own, who's feeding that and where's that coming from? And I love the idea that blockchain can help solve that. I think that's really smart. But it also makes me think about the role of the communicator as the verifier of information. And I think we often forget that in the work that we do. So I think we need to remember that part of our role is to verify, validate certain statements and information. I know from my time as a global head of comms, we would talk about being the best, the market leader in something. And I was like, well, and what measure are we? What's the measure of that? Like, what are we? Because you could take lots of different measures, but which one specifically are you using in order to
Hmm.
be able to call yourself that? And I think that's really important. Even if it's one data point that does it, it doesn't matter, but it's asking that question to make sure that that's true. And I think checking truth is really important for AI and making sure that we can verify and validate the information that's coming through.
Yeah, it made me think of on a previous episode, you had talked about a friend of yours who was using AI for the first time and actually found bad, like
Hmm.
didn't know it was bad data, but AI presented it as bad data that they went to go and verify and found out it was inaccurate. And so I do think that's knowing that's a risk is the first
Mm.
part of it. But what I love, why I said you're going to hear me talk about this data poisoning now a lot is I think there's an element of this that it is pervasive throughout our profession in internal comms, where there are these data points like the one that I hate the most, which is that employees have shorter attention spans than goldfish, and people take this data as real and they believe it.
Hmm.
And we now know it's not true, but because it's so good, like it's now spoiled that conversation, actually poison. It's not real. It's not good. And
Mm.
there's other data points, like the one that was around like how many hours employees spend searching for things on the internet. When you trace it back, it's not real data, but that's poisoned the conversations that
Mm.
we've had. So that's why I love this point of when we're sharing data, and there's a lot of data that's very valid and some data that's not, but people see data as data. And if 68% of people said this and 33, then that's the truth. When we know we know the source behind it.
Mm.
So I think AI is at risk, but I think also everything we do is at risk with this data poisoning.
Mm. And it's made me think as well about that data that was a percentage of your communication is body language, a percentage is tone, a percentage is the words. And that is poison data. It's not real. Somebody went back and spoke to the original researcher, and they said it's not the purpose of the study, and it's been sort of
Right.
misappropriated. And I now want to do a list of all the poisoned data out there so that we can be like, here's everything that's been poisoned over the years.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to take action when we see that. And I think that's our job as communicators from an ethical, moral, credible standpoint to make sure that we don't use those things once we know that they have been poisoned. But I think it's a
Hmm.
great term. I can't wait to see you use it more regularly.
Count on it. Count on it. We're going to go to one of our favorite topics next, Jenny, for the next article. Executives may be obsessed with herding employees back into offices, but the evidence keeps stacking up against them. Remote work hasn't tanked productivity. Employees continue to prize flexibility, and many companies clinging to rigid mandates are struggling with retention. The World Financial Review argues that remote work is quietly winning, Jenny, no matter how loudly some leaders protest. For HR and comms leaders, the question is less about square footage and more about how to sustain connection, culture, and collaboration without defaulting to simply butts in seats. Jenny, one of our favorite topics to
Mm.
come back to. It's like we did this ping pong game going back and
Oh,
forth
I'm
on
ready.
this between the
I'm
two of us.
ready.
Do you think remote work is now a permanent part of workplace culture, or will these lazy executives continue to pressure, eventually reshaping the balance?
So here's my issue. The
Just
headline of
one?
this, I mean, I've got many. The headline for this article is Why Remote Work Wins Despite the Executive Obsession with Offices. However, I shall refer to my printed material, which I've highlighted. The article goes on to say the most effective alternative method is a team-based hybrid model. Now, this also tracks with the research from Gallup, which I'm still reading in that culture shock book, is that actually remote work doesn't win. The winner is hybrid, but hybrid determined as a team together, this is how we're going to work, and agreeing that in your team because that's who you need to collaborate with, or however that works. So there isn't anything to support the fact that remote work is winning. What's winning is a blend. And that does track with the Gallup data, which I don't have to hand, but I'll bring it into the episode next week because I want to talk about what that data says about number of working days and different things like that. So in answer to your question about is remote work a permanent part of workplace culture, or will the executive pressure eventually reshape the balance? I think hybrid is going to win. I
Mhm.
genuinely think hybrid is going to win. I think it's good for people who like to go to the office and like to be at home sometimes. I think it's good for people from a social connection perspective. I think that some of the reasons about it makes us more productive is nonsense. And then he said a rude word then, because we don't actually talk about what that is. So in the article, this says they report feeling more effective when working from home. What does effective mean? Like, what do you just feel more effective, or are you being more effective, and how are you measuring that effectiveness? And I know that's getting really into the nitty gritty, but this whole discussion about we're more productive, or what does that look like? And I think that's the bit we're still missing. So I think hybrid's going to win. I think we're going to continue to see stories about returning to the office, because I think where it had to swing so much the other way with the pandemic, it's now going to swing so much the other way with the office. And then somewhere in about 3 to 5 years, we'll come into a happy medium, is my prediction.
Well, I agree with you that hybrid is ultimately what wins, but that's not what's making the headlines with, like we talked about AT&T and
Mm.
T and Chevron, where they're saying 5 days a week. So I don't know if I'm using this phrase correctly or not, Jenny, but are these executives who are demanding like 5 days a week in office, are they full of beans? Like, is
No,
that the
they're
right
no, they're
use
not.
of?
No, because you're full of
Oh,
beans
okay.
is excited.
Well, I think they are
Oh,
excited about having
maybe.
people come back. I don't know. Again, I don't know, but
Well,
I think that's where here's what I wonder what's happening at these companies. Are the people at the top thinking 5 days a week, people are going to be in? That's the demand, and they create it and they print it in a tablet and it's in stone, like on the front of the building, and all these things. And then really the employees are like, man, I'm not in here every day. Like, or we talked about that coffee badging where people like badge in and then sneak out the back door and leave. Like, what behaviors are you
yeah.
training employees on this? I wonder really about the enforcement slash discipline around the 5 days a week. I
Mm.
agree. Hybrid is ideal, but that's not what this new they knew this the headlines that are out there from some companies are saying you've got to be in the office 5 days a week for us to be productive. We know that's not true. But I think the reason hybrid wins out is because you actually don't need to be in the office 5 days a week. Some roles, absolutely, you probably do because of your job. You actually
Hmm.
can't do that job anywhere else. But because now with the way technology works and security works, and leaders saw, oh, I can be at home and log in securely and all of those things and get work done. Like we know it's possible. So I think it's just this outsider view of these leaders kind of taking this approach of like, I'm in control, that command and control approach, instead of empowering teams, to your point, to do what's best for them.
I also think it's such a good example of addressing the symptoms and not the root cause. So I think what they're seeing is, we're not maybe hitting our numbers. People are telling us they feel quite siloed. We're not collaborating very much together. People have, maybe our engagement scores are going low, if you choose to measure that. And then going, I know, let's bring everybody back in and then we can push them all together, and then that will make everything all right again. And it's not addressing the root cause. Whereas if you looked at the root cause of why those symptoms were happening, then you'd be able to come up with a solution that would work. But it's that sticking a plaster over a crack in the hope that it's going to fix it. And I'll talk more about this next week in terms of what the engagement numbers are telling us when they peaked, where they are now. And I think some of this does link to how we lead. And I think it's also linked to making employees feel like you care about them. And I think that this is such an example of doing the opposite of that, but trying to have the outcome of that that is just messy.
We had a call earlier this week in ecology, and we had a bunch of members on, and one of our members was calling in from work, and I messaged her after, and I was like, for the longest time, I hoped she had the saddest virtual background possible, almost like satire, because it was just her and a sea of empty cubicles behind her.
Oh.
And when I messaged her afterward, she was like, no, I have to be in here 4 days a week. And there was literally no one around. Like, I never saw a single person walking, moving. They were empty. That's the problem.
That's mad. But that
It
but
is.
this is so common. I spoke to a friend this week who's having to be in the office 3 days a week, which is in her contract, but she was doing 2 days a week, and that was better for her, and she got more work done. But there's new people that have joined the organization, and their contract doesn't say 3 days a week in the office. And so then you have a fairness issue around how you're treating employees. And she's saying to me, I don't know why I need to be in 3 days a week. Like, and those other people who, and we all do the same job,
Mhm.
but we've all got different rules. And that, as a very process driven person, that makes me just want to revolt, because I'm not doing that. Like, that's not fair. The process should be equal and all of those things. And that's where it doesn't work. Like, you've really got to think about the execution of it if you're doing it. And I don't think that thought's going into it.
We're going to wrap this episode up, Jenny, with one of perhaps the most evergreen debates in our field, and also perhaps one of the most exhausting debates in our field, which is, should internal comms report in the HR, corp comms, directly to the CEO? Shell Holtz argued there is a right answer, and he makes the case that reporting lines should shape influence, resources, and cultural impact. But honestly, Jenny, it feels like we are stuck in a loop, still asking the exact same question, not even year after year, day after day, week after week, month after month. And it honestly made me wonder, Jenny, do other people in other departments obsess this much about where they report into an organization? Or is this just like an internal comms quirk, echo chamber type thing that's happening? So do you think this fixation on reporting lines says more about our identity crisis than about where the roles should actually sit in organizations?
So I completely agree with Shell, where he says that the reporting line shape influence, resources, and cultural impact. I agree with that. I also agree with his point that your relationship as the internal communication professional internally shouldn't be dictated to by where you sit. And I have reported into marketing, I've reported into HR, I've reported into commercial, I've reported and marketing again. So I've done a real mix. And I think Shell says in his article he's only ever reported into HR. So I don't think he's had quite that different experience. But it's made no difference to me. And I think, again, this is a symptom. The reason people like to talk about this is because they're frustrated that they're not being brought into conversations at the right time, and they're not having access to the right people in order to shape the message, to shape the content, to do the job that they need to do. And the solution to that, as we seem to talk about, is where we report. It's got nothing to do with that, but that's my hypothesis about where it comes from. I think it's that it's trying to solve the problem of not being brought in quick enough, whereas actually the solution to that lies within you as an individual. And that's really uncomfortable, but it does. So
Yep.
it's not about where you sit. It's about you looking at your relationships, your influence, your expertise, your credibility. And I think if you can look at that rather than where you sit, then you'll solve the problem. But I'm also with you on the fact it's a boring conversation that we probably have every week for the last 20 years. And I really would hope we would move on.
I think what bothers me about it is we're trying to blame something that we have zero control over.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone that actually gets to dictate who their boss is or who their reporting structure is. It just happens that way. Also, Shell, if you're listening, I'm a little disappointed that he wrote this, because it just feels like it adds validity to the conversation, and it keeps like stoking this debate that I wish would just die out. And maybe me bringing into this is making it worse too. I don't know. But I felt like I almost want to tell people, just stop with it. Just stop. I need to come up with like a universal response when anybody on LinkedIn I see talking about this. Need to get like, is there like a yawn emoji? Is
Yeah,
there
it
like
doesn't
a
exist
I'm
yet.
bored emoji? Like something. Like we've got to move on
Yeah.
from this. And I don't know how we do it. We just exercise the demons. We come to realize like it's not going to change. So let's just focus on what we can do. I don't know. So Shell, I'm sorry. Can we just drop it, please?
I think, do you know what we can do is we can send them a link to this episode and then point them to the timestamp where we start talking about it and say, we know this is a conversation that you have. Here's the solution. And
Right.
then point them here so they can hear this conversation around you can't control that. That's not going to solve the problems that you've got. To solve the problems that you've got, you need to look at your relationships and your influence.
Yeah.
End scene.
So that wraps up our episode this week, Jenny, live from New York City. What is your freak out,
So my
Jenny
freak
Field?
out this week is leaders leading. So I find myself having conversations with different leadership teams at the moment about what their job is as a leader, which I always find interesting because I feel like that should be something that people are aware of. And I suppose the freak out is when you're leading as a director in an organization, you can't be looking up. And I think that I still see that a lot. And when I get frustrated when we record these and slap my thigh about engagement scores from leaders and things, and then I see it sort of out in the wild, my freak out is just, come on now. If you're a director in an organization, you have to take action, you have to be proactive, you have to move, you have to do the things and not wait for permission. And I'd just like to see more of that,
Mm-hmm.
please.
No, here on that. I know that I've been guilty a lot of times of like looking up, not so much for permission, because I actually don't seek out permission,
No, really?
more for like validation or
Yes.
recognition. And it's that same thing where they say like, oh, you don't have to have leadership in the title to be a leader. I get all that, but some of us are just seduced by
Yeah.
levels above us. And so it's that constant reminder to me that no, you can't control where you report. You also can't control what the people above you do, but you
Yeah.
can impact the people that are
Yeah.
out from you. So yeah, I think that's a good piece of advice for everyone.
Yeah. What's
My
yours?
freak out happened this morning, Jenny, where I was writing a LinkedIn post showing gratitude for Rocky Walls having a discussion inside ecology all around how we should story listen before we story tell. And it was this really great exercise of how to better listen for stories. And as I was writing that, I then had this other post where someone talked about all this AI. You can paste content in to see if it's AI written. So
Ooh.
apparently there's all these checks you can do, or I don't know how the algorithms work or whatever, but it can tell you like, was this copy, their guess, AI written or not? I wrote this LinkedIn post thanking Rocky. I was like, you know what? I'm going to paste that into this tool. It said with an 88% certainty that it was AI written, which is not 100%. So I was apparently part of the 12%. But my freak out is AI now training us how to write? Like, are we now writing based on what we're reading? And is that
Mm.
training us to where even the AI checkers are think that it's AI that's writing it, even though if it's us? And I'm on this weird little cycle of things.
Okay, so I think we need to test this because my question is, well, what's the baseline? Like, is because is everybody 88%? Because that's just how
I
that
don't
because
know.
and I think because 88% doesn't really mean anything without the anchor point of that number. So if you write another LinkedIn post, another one, and you run that through the tool, and each one it comes back at between 80 and 90%, then that to me just says that the tool is saying that that's how it thinks humans are so closely linked to AI versus AI like humans. But that could just be the number. It could just be between 80 and 90%. I don't like,
Well, that's what I wonder. Like,
is it ever gonna come back and go, oh no, this is definitely written by a human? Like what
like
what would it need to be in order for it to know that?
if we are training AI and then AI is also training us, like, then how do you differentiate between the two? I don't
Yeah.
know, but it got me kind of just
Yeah.
in this
I
vicious circle.
can you add some more, and then we can either talk about it next week or let me know whether they're all in that 80 to 90%, because I have a theory that
Yeah.
they're all going to be in that, because that's just where that number is. A bit like engagement is at 36, like that's where it is.
Now, here's where I think, as we know, a lot of companies are profit motivated, Jenny. Is this because this was like a free test, but then
Mm.
it said it would rewrite it for you to pass all the AI checkers, but that came at a subscription
Oh, get
cost.
in the bin. Get in the bin. Get it. Of course it's 88% then, isn't it? Like they're not going to go, oh, you're like 32% human. Bye bye now. That is total marketing nonsense. That is absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Oh, of course, it's 88%.
Well, I
Yeah.
fell for it because I was like, "Oh my god, am I AI now? Like, is this
I a robot?
right?" With that, I want to thank you all for joining us this week. All of the articles that have inspired this conversation are in the show notes, and please don't forget to rate and review after you've listened. Subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and please pass this along to someone you think would enjoy listening or watching. You can also find Frequency on YouTube. Thank you to Poet Ali, who I got to see last night, Jenny, for contributing the music to the show. We'll be back next week with more news and insights and opinions about everything comms and leadership and workplaces today. Keep tuning in and turning up.